I love interviewing my close friends because I forget that we're actually doing a professional interview instead of just a chit chat back and forth. My friend Helen Appleby and I were talking the other day about how our clients disagree sometimes, how they need to go to their superiors or to the board and have conversations. And she mentioned something that she taught me a long time ago about clean escalations and dirty escalations. And I thought, this is such a good, very specific topic to talk about on the show. Now, she's been on the podcast more than any other human being on the process on the planet because she's such a good friend and because she's such a wealth of information. She has been an executive coach for over a decade. Before that, a global VP. She's written the book, The Unwritten Rules of Women's Leadership. Which is, I give out to men. It's such a good book. And she's writing a new book, which I'm going to kind of corner her and ask her about before we end this conversation. Helen, thank you for being here once again.
Thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure.
You know,
Turn our ramblings into podcasts.
For me, it's just so good to have someone to bounce things off of. Like, we don't talk specifically about this client with this name, with this, but when we come into situations or we come into coaching into situations where like we can bounce ideas off of each other, it's so easy. And every time I come to something with something to you, you always have a really clear way of making the distinction. So we were talking about when people need to raise, like, they're disagreeing and they need to go up in order to get that resolved. So just do your spiel about clean escalations and dirty escalations.
Happy to.
How is that for a professional? Just slide in, tee up for a question. There we go.
Happy to. I think in our working with leaders, Mark, we both work with leaders who don't always agree with each other. And so that topic of, how do you disagree well? I don't know that we're really taught that, are we? Like, when we're young, we learn how to deal with conflict from our families. And, depending on your family, for me, if I'm British, we sort of didn't really. And, there are many cultures that really do and do it in a different way. So learning how to disagree well is a skill. And, there are tools and strategies that we can use. And I think this concept of escalation and clean escalation and dirty escalation is really helpful for leaders. So if we can't agree, what do we do about it? So let's make it real, right? If you're head of sales and I'm head of marketing, which is both of our backgrounds, we might well have been in a situation where we professionally disagreed. And what I talk to leaders about is the distinction between escalating cleanly and a dirty escalation. So a clean escalation looks like you and I discuss the fact that we can't agree on this. And what I'll always say, a really important part of a clean escalation is the quality of the listening, the quality of the curiosity that you and I can bring to, like, I wonder what Mark sees here that I don't see. Because, normally with our colleagues, and certainly if you and I were working together, we have a lot of respect typically for each other. So really trying to understand through their eyes, for me, of what is it that Mark, why, like, what's going on that Mark doesn't agree with this? Is it the content? Is it the way it's been brought to him? Is it that he doesn't feel like he's been involved? Is it what's Mark's agenda here? What's the deeper agenda? What does he want from this? And really bringing curiosity to that, to understand that and seeing if we can find a way through. And, done well, you would do that for me too.
And that takes a ton of maturity, a ton of, like, sometimes you have to get a hold of yourself, take a walk and get yourself, because when you're disagreeing and it's feeling threatened so much so that you need to escalate, you really have to get yourself into a space where you have you think good intentions, right? And give people the benefit of the doubt and get to what you said. What am I missing here?
Right. So, and it's that sense of, sort of energetically, to use that word, I think getting clear on, do I want to be right or do I want to find a solution?
Mm.
Because sometimes when we're triggered and we're backed into the corner, it, you know, our back gets up and we want to be right. And, you and I are familiar with that expression, aren't we? Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And, or, do you want to be right and make Mark wrong? Or a much more helpful energy in this space is, how can we solve this together?
Mm.
And if we can put the problem, not between us, but sit next to each other and say, how can we solve this together? That's the basis for clean escalation. So it's understanding, it's real listening, and trying to find a solution or a compromise.
So
Then,
how do you
if
how
we
do you go
can't,
together?
right, then if we can't, then how do you go together? And how do we have that conversation of, look, it looks like, we've both really tried here. And it looks like we can't agree on this, and we understand why. And, I understand why, this would mess up your numbers, or why this would, upset a key customer, or, require you to go back and redo something. And I still believe it's the right way forward. So if we can't agree, then let's escalate and go to the CEO and talk to them and have them make the decision.
Nice.
So that's sort of that's the principle and how you do a clean escalation. The opposite of that is dirty escalation.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, what do most people do?
Right, most people in that situation, I would complain about Mark. I might actually go and talk to our boss behind your back. And yeah, so talk about you, not to you. Go to our boss. And what that does is it creates, toxicity, doesn't it? It
Mm-hmm.
creates churn. It creates our teams both knowing that we can't agree, which is, I say to leaders, if two of you can't agree, you only really see the disagreement between you. The piece that you miss is all of the churn in both sales and marketing, because the
Mm-hmm.
head of sales and marketing can't agree. And that burns so many hours. So, and it also corrodes trust between the two of us. So if I go to the CEO and complain about you, at some point you're going to find out that I did that. And then, that makes the relationship between us worse,
Mm.
because now I've betrayed you, right? And depending on how important trust is and loyalty is to you, that could produce a big feeling, a small feeling, or maybe even a big feeling. And then what are you going to do, right? I'll get you next time, Helen. It's just, it's yeah, it undermines psychological safety, destroys trust, and just creates a ton of churn in the organization.
One of the ways I think, to remember to do this is to remember which team you're on. Because again, when you're on the executive leadership team, you have to take a global view. You look after your department, but you have to take a global look at the organization. You're now part of the entire organization. How many times have we heard in 360s, I want them to pick their head up and think about the entire organization and learn what the other organizations are doing. So if you can take that perspective, you're more likely to go as team members rather than adversaries.
Great. And, asking yourself that question, whose team am I on right now, is pretty challenging, right? Because if I'm fighting for marketing, then I'm not on your team. I'm on my team beneath me. And, as a senior leader, that's not right, right? Obviously, I lead that team, but my real team is you and, the CFO. And so whose team are we on is can be a challenging question to answer.
Whole chapter in the Rising Leader Handbook.
There we go.
So, I have this parallel thing going on in my head while we're talking, that this works in families and marriages, and like we can apply this everywhere. Now, I was interviewing John Sapone, an executive in various tech companies. He just got a new position, and he was talking about how he got a flaming email from one of his leadership team. And it was just unprofessional. It was awful. It was complaining. And what he did was he called that person, called them into his office, and said, I want you to reread the email you sent me from my perspective.
Mhm.
And I want you to judge whether it was professional, whether it was mature, whether it was furthering your cause, whether it was, actually effective. And
Brilliant.
then come back to me and let me know what you think.
Mm.
And he did that. He
Mhm.
came back and he said, I will handle this. This is between me and someone else.
Mhm.
I will take care of that. And
Mm.
they actually became friends, those two department heads who were butting
Mm.
heads.
Mhm.
But so as a leader, if
Mm.
someone takes a dirty escalation to you, what do I think John handled that well. What are your thoughts on that?
And often, to be honest, often that's as leaders in organizations, that's where we see it the most. It's when they come to us. And so I think teaching people the concept of clean escalation and dirty escalation and explaining, what our expectations are and agreeing that's how we're going to work going forward. Making our expectations clear is critical, decoding it for our teams. And then, the 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 line that I say to clients is you have to be really careful not to take the dirty escalation
Mm-hmm.
because it's so tempting. Again, especially if you have a strong sense of injustice, like how dare they? You know, how dare Mark not, didn't he remember if I'm the CEO, doesn't he remember that, I said this and my expectation is this, I'm going to have a word with him, and head of marketing's like, excellent. I'm right. I'm favorite child today. Right. And
Grown men and women
yeah,
all fall for it. We all fall for it every
yeah,
day.
yes. So what our CEO would need to do in that case is say, interesting, Helen, have you spoken to Mark about it? And I would say, well, no, I'll be talking to him next week. And the CEO needs to stay really level, right? The leader needs to stay really level and say, good. I'm hoping that you can resolve this between the two of you. If you can't, then come back and talk to me together. So not taking the dirty escalation, not getting involved at all, and being clear what the behavior that you expect is. When I talk to teams about this, I will say, hands up if you have more than one child,
Mm.
two children or more, and many people do at a senior level. And I'll say, that there's that moment where both kids run in from the garden and they're like, she hit me first. Said that's what it feels like when leaders in the team are fighting and when they're dirty escalating. And so, I want you to be really, really clear that, if you can't agree and if you dirty escalate and complain and run to the leader, that's what it feels like. And it's exhausting as a leader to be, resolving fights between our children at work. Isn't it? It's awful. So, be very clear that this doesn't look good. Helen and Mark, head of sales and head of marketing and head of sales, it doesn't look good for you either.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you do this together? How can you build trust? Because, disagreements are normal. They're natural. And again, thinking of them as something that we need to avoid is not the right way to think about it. It's normal for us to disagree. It's a normal creative tension. And how can we work together to find, a win-win or even a better solution? How can we learn? Right? It's not about not disagreeing. It's about learning to disagree well, or as I call it, disagreeing without breaking rapport.
Mm. Your career has evolved since I've known you for a decade, since you wrote the definitive book on women's leadership. You've been working with a lot of teams. It's heavily coded towards executive leadership teams, and I believe that you're writing a book about it.
I am, yes. I found that the work has moved on, and the more that I work with CEOs, some of whom, as you know, I've worked with for many years now, they we both, right? We do an enormous amount to shift leaders, don't we, in a coaching assignment. And then what they're saying then is, I really like this. Can you work with my team?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it's really evolved. And so, my interest and the work I'm doing is really around how do we build healthy, high-performing teams? And that starts with the leader, doesn't it? Because as we both know, so the leader goes, so the team goes. And so, learning these behaviors and building our self-awareness as leaders is really the foundation of how you lead a team well. But how do you lead yourself well? How do you lead the team well? How do you lead the organization well? How do you do that in a healthy way? And what's the work that we need to do on ourselves? And then what are the tools and strategies and agreements like these that we need? And also, how do we build trust and psychological safety?
And that's what I've seen you be doing in these leadership team workshops is actually taking some of Patrick Lencioni's work, but actually putting it feet on the ground and actually having exercises where you create trust, where you create accountability, where you disagree well, and doing that real time with your folks. What's the
where
word?
you give feedback. That's the other skill that is really, really like, you wouldn't believe, and you and I both done it, sit in a room and say, right, this is the leadership team. Now we're going to go around and we're going to give each other feedback, right? Sit with your piece of paper and work out for each of these people that you work with every day and tell them what's something that they do really well for the organization. So what works well? And then what's something they could do even better? Like, how could they contribute? What's one behavior that they could change that would contribute more to this team? So what works well? Even better if WWWEBI, great tool. And how much that literally makes people sweat, right? How much
You don't have to jump off a bridge and bungee jump in order to feel that. Just offer up some feedback in a group setting.
Terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And so, but that just shows the lack of trust and the lack of muscle to do this. And I talk about having if you imagine between each leader, or even between friends, or are the pipes clear? Energetically, are the pipes clear between us? And beginning to notice, is there something in the pipes? Is there grit? Is there sand? Is there grit? Is there, rocks? Right? And how do we not ignore that? But how do we go and have a conversation about that so that we can be even better together? And it's just not a skill that we're taught, and it is really teachable. So I've worked with a team, and after a few rounds of practicing this, they're so funny. They're like, oh, the female leader said, oh, I know how to do this now. Should I go into his office and I shut the door and I say, I've got grit, let's talk. Nice. And he's like, great, let's talk. So it's so easy for her now. I mean, she's brave and she's an amazing leader, but that it's become funny.
But shared language is so useful to, if you both were in the workshop and you both know what grit is. Now it's so much easier to have that conversation.
Yes. And from a place of trust and love, right? Like these they're both great leaders, and they're committed to the same vision, and but they can do it with real kindness, candor, right? Candor, the word candor comes from the word kindness. And that back to my first point at the beginning of this discussion, right? The key thing is that energetically you want to be doing it together, figuring it out together. She's not saying, I've got grit, therefore I'm going to make you wrong. She's saying, like, this, I'm struggling with this, help me with this. You keep doing this and I really need this. And they get it resolved.
Nice.
And if they can't, they can escalate, can't they? And they know how to do that too.
Yeah, the way I describe it is, if your spidey sense says something's off, go check. Right, just go check, like, because you're probably right. It might not even be about the exact thing that it was, but something's going on, and you usually So
I can sit a group of leaders on a Zoom call or in a room, which I've done with them, and say, look around. Who do you have grit with? Who of the people on the screen or people around this table, who do you need to have a conversation with? And they'll go,
Yeah,
Oof.
that'll fog up some lenses.
Ooh, you know immediately. So,
Brilliant. What's the working title of the book?
um, leaders health check.
Nice. When do
Leaders
you
health.
when do you
How
think
to
it's going to be
build
out?
highly it's healthy, high performing teams. And actually, I'm really interested in the reason it's a health check. I'm designing it so that it is also an assessment,
Mm,
right? How can we, how does that break down? And how can we score ourselves, right? Ourselves as the leader, and then what does the team think? Because again, a lot of the work that we do is about building self-awareness, isn't it? So you and I have both been in situations where a leader will say, oh, everyone's honest with me, my door's open, they can always come and talk to me. And you're like, oh, yeah, right. We'll see in the 360. Apparently not. Apparently nobody tells you the
and
truth.
that's not an indictment. Even really good leaders who do have an open door policy, uh,
Mm,
don't know a lot of things and
mm.
could do better.
Right. And so having it be an assessment, um, and then a series of tools, that either they can run as workshops or they can get help with, um, is how it's shaping up. And I'm very excited about it. And it'll be out later this year.
Great. So about later this year. Great. That's the question I wanted to get in there is when should we expect it so I can put it on the calendar and I can buy a case of them so I can give them away. Helen, thank you for your friendship and thank you for always just these conversations for me are a masterclass, and have me thinking. And my next coaching conversation is always better after talking to you. So thank you for that. If people want to find more of you, where can they find you?
On LinkedIn or at helenappleby.coaching.com.
We'll put those links in the show notes. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your time. To everybody else, I hope you learned something because I always learn something from Helen Appleby. I love you a ton. Have a great rest of the day.